welcome to another conversation. So today I'm here with Riley, and we're going to be talking about something that actually I don't think I've ever spoken about really before with someone who has actually done this anyway. And what I'm referring to is like writing a book, basically, but like a fiction book. Um, that we'll get into it, but I don't know if it's like explicitly antinatalist or they're just undertones and stuff, but we'll get into all of that sort of stuff. But the first thing I wanted to ask just before we get into about the book generally is just like learning a bit about you. And um can what is your sort of like background, and how did you first come across the idea of antinatalism?
Well, I guess I've always been kind of sensitive, I think, to all the kind of pain and suffering in the world. Um, you know, um, I started to feel very frustrated about it, maybe starting, I recall, like in high school. Um, and I kind of, I think that frustration kind of grew all throughout my 20s. And then, really, when I was 28, I think it was in 2018, I think it was, I kind of hit this turning point where I kind of recall having this moment where I suddenly realized that, not only is the world just kind of a horrible place to be in, but people can't even consent to be a part of all this.
Mm,
Um, and I mean, I guess I already knew that, but I hadn't thought about it much before.
mm,
And the more I thought about it, I sort of recognized it more and more as a problem. Um, and then, I mean, I guess I started looking around. I discovered the term antinatalism, and I was exploring forums and
mm,
getting a rundown on that whole philosophy. And um, I felt like that pretty much um, described me and how I think. In 2009, I developed a chronic illness, um, and I haven't really found a solution to that. So that's
mm,
kind of just made me double down even
mm,
more on being antinatalist. Kind of had uh, some hopes for my life that have been not completely destroyed, but have certainly been um, being sick has made a lot of things more difficult for me, and
mm.
that's something that could happen to anybody. I didn't really do. There's nothing that I did that caused it to happen. It just um, kind of did. So
Mm.
yeah, I think that's all the background I really have on that.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying about when you discovered antinatalism. It sort of clicked with things that you kind of already knew but hadn't really consciously, you know, maybe observed, like, sort of put under the microscope. And I had the same. Um, I had the same thing. There would like one really good example, an obvious example that I think a lot of people relate to, or maybe not. I don't know. But it's said a lot in the UK where I am. It's often said by people that life is unfair. Like
Mhm.
if someone wants something, they don't get it, and they're moaning about it or lamenting over it. Often it'll be said to them, well, life isn't fair, so you don't get everything you want, etc., etc. Um,
Mhm.
and this had been said to me, hundreds of times up until the point when I became antinatalist when I was like 20. So it had been said hundreds of times to me before. I'd said it to other people, and then it was only when I became antinatalist that it really clicked with what that meant. And it's like, oh shit, what? Yeah, actually, life is unfair, and why would I be putting what? Like, why should I put someone else in an unfair situation when I literally don't need to? So I had like a similar experience to what you. It resonated with me what you just said. Um,
Yeah.
I was quickly also going to ask, how did you get into writing as well? Not this specific book, but just generally, how did you get into writing?
Well, it's, I mean, I think probably all the way back in maybe second grade, I was writing. I was writing, filling up a notebook with silly little comics.
Mm,
I was really into newspaper comics at the time, like Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes, and I was
mm,
imitating those. And then I write. I don't really write comics now. I write prose fiction, and I think I started doing that when I was 12 years old. Um, and I just when I started doing it, I realized I really enjoyed it, and I felt like it was something that I wanted to keep doing for the rest of my life, really. So yeah, and I've kept with it ever since.
mm. So going on to like the specific book we're going to be talking about, which is Vile Visions, which is it's a collection of horror stories, right?
Um, yeah, that's right. Uh,
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about Vile Visions was the artwork for it on the front, um, which was interesting to me because the face you see on the front reminds me very much of the alien or aliens from Mars Attacks. I don't know if you've seen Mars Attacks. I think uh, I think Mars Attacks was. I might be getting this completely wrong, but I think it was one of Tim Burton's first films, if not his first film. And I'm maybe gonna be horribly embarrassing myself now because it might not even be Tim Burton, but I'm pretty sure it is, and I'm pretty sure it was one of his first films. And the face on the front looks remarkably like the aliens from Mars Attacks. Where did you come up with? Because you said you do comics, so did you come up with the cover art, or was that something that you were inspired? You found it as inspiration somewhere else?
well, um, yeah, I worked with a cover artist, and I kind of gave him an idea of what I
Mm,
wanted to see with the cover, and he um, kind of ran with it and came up with what you see in the final product.
mm,
Um, yeah, there is kind of a lot of what you would what I would call sort of procreation related horror in Vile Visions. So I felt like I wanted to have a cover that reflected that with the sort of the fetus
mm,
that's on there and the skull baby. Um,
mm. Yeah, so let's like dive into the contents of the book. So, um, how many stories are in there, and how many sort of deal with the theme of antinatalism or procreation?
well, let's see. They're a little over. I don't remember the exact number. I think they're around 20 stories,
Hmm.
and they deal with their horror stories with various themes. There some of them are psychological horror, some of them are kind of existential. It really there's a variety of different types of stories that I wrote for the collection.
Mm.
And I would say pretty much all of them are at least what you would call very pessimistic. But as far as antinatalist, I mean, there's one that I wrote that is kind of I wrote it to sort of um, have kind of a slasher kind of feel, I guess. But the villain in it is the woman, the protagonist's unborn baby, basically,
Mm.
and he sort of torments her from within the womb. He can take control of her body and make her do like um, all kinds of horrible things, really.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, and that kind of is not really explicitly saying, don't uh, don't procreate, but I guess it could kind of be metaphorical in a sense for all the things that can kind of go wrong
Mm.
um, in a pregnancy, and um, kind of I think the baby that the villain also at one point sort of says, "Well, I'm doing this to you, and because I didn't want this. I didn't want to be born, and that's why I'm tormenting you like this." And
Mm.
the baby is certainly uh, a villain, um, but all the same, I kind of I kind of wanted that to be his justification because that um, reflects my antinatalist views.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
No, no, sorry, finish. Go, go, go.
yeah, and I guess the one other story that I think of as being really sort of openly antinatalist in the collection is it's called Wheel of Misfortune, and it's sort of a story about it's it explores this concept where like so in this story when a couple are having a baby, they go into the hospital and they have to spin this wheel basically, and the wheel has all these different things it can land on, like
Mm.
diseases
Mm.
uh, or other various types of misfortune that can befall uh, a child. Um, and so the wheel is not something that actually exists in real life, of course, but it, in a way, having children is kind of similar to that. You're basically spinning a metaphorical wheel,
Mm.
so to speak, with the chance that all sorts of terrible things could happen to this child that you're bringing into the world. And I just kind of I made that. I took that away from abstract into being like a real physical thing within the story, to kind of illustrate the point, I guess.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, at the very beginning of when you were explain, like even just from the name Wheel of Misfortune, my mind instantly went to, okay, spinning a wheel and it will land on some of the things that can happen to someone when they're created. So it's essentially like a fictionalized story based around the risk argument for antinatalism, which is really interesting. And yeah, I think like I don't know what your approach was when you were sitting down to, well, let me just ask you, like when you were sitting down, obviously there's the rest of the stories in the book, but when you came to sit down and write the stories that were going to have antinatalist themes in them, was did you write them because you just thought antinatalism would be an interesting theme to explore in a story, or did you want, and it could be both, or did you want to um, write a story that specifically gave off the message of antinatalism, actually trying to communicate that to people rather than just exploring it as as a form of fun, basically, on um, how can I base a story on this sort of idea?
Um, yeah, I don't really remember exactly how those particular stories came to me.
Mm,
I mean, um, I guess antinatalism is so much part of my thinking now. It was inevitable that I mean ideas kind of just come to me um, over time.
mm,
I'll be out, out in the world, just experiencing things, and every now and then, um, some light just goes on, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's an idea for a story. And I guess just because antinatalism is so ingrained into my thinking, it's inevitable that some of these ideas that I come up with are going to be related to that, especially
mm,
with writing horror, which is, I mean, horror is all about just trying to come up with the darkest, most depressing things that I can think of. And
mhm,
yeah, I mean, antinatalism is really um, connected to that. So,
mm. Yeah, it can be a good canvas for something like that. Uh, I don't know how much you've read of or know about the just sort of wider genre of horror, but to your knowledge, like how common is it for antinatalism to come up as a theme in horror? Because I through my experience of engaging with people about antinatalism, the story of Frankenstein has come up quite a lot. Whether there were intentional um, uh, antinatalist messages in there or undertones or themes, antinatalists have definitely picked them out, whether they were intentionally put in there or not for that reason. Um, and I've always found that like an interesting example of something that probably was unintentional. Although I don't know, the sort of ethical beliefs of the author. But yeah, what to your knowledge, what is like the extent of antinatalist themes in horror?
well, yeah, I think it probably is rare that they show up intentionally.
Mm,
Um, at least, like if we talking about Frankenstein, it's hard to know what Mary Shelley believed. She had four children,
mm,
um, so it's unlikely that Frankenstein is necessarily um, having an intentional message of
yeah.
like don't create life, um, but it certainly um, is easy to read it that way.
Mm,
And I think that's the case probably with a lot of horror, even though most horror writers I know they just write horror because they like writing horror.
yeah.
They're not necessarily they don't necessarily have these extremely dark worldviews like I do that fuel the horror that they write.
Mm.
They just enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Um, but all the same, I think you can easily sort of read antinatalist themes in a lot of horror just because it's usually trying to horror is about just trying to plumb the absolute darkest aspects of our reality.
Mm.
Um, and so I do think that those kinds of themes show up whether they're intentional or not. Um,
Yeah.
Really, the only horror writer I know who has openly talked about um, sort of being anti-natalist is Thomas Ligotti. You know
Mm.
Thomas Ligotti?
Yeah, I haven't read. I know he wrote The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. I haven't read it. I know loads of people that have, obviously. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, so I'm aware of him. I haven't read any of his stuff, but yeah, please continue because I'd be interested to hear.
Oh, sure. Yeah, he wrote that, and I've read some of that. And he also writes horror fiction,
Mm.
which is um, considered to be some of the best horror fiction of the modern day. Now, he's incredibly brilliant, and his stories usually go way over my head, but I
Mm.
do enjoy reading them anyway because I don't know, they're very well written. Very he has a beautiful way with words, and
Mm.
um, I certainly do think he's very worth reading. Anyone who's into horror should read him, and anyone who's into antinatalism should read him and his conspiracy against the human race, especially.
Mm.
Um,
If you could recommend, because I know like most of the people who are watching this video will be antinatalists, so most of them probably know Conspiracy Against the Human Race already. If they don't, obviously go read it. I will go read it. Um, but besides that book, which one would you recommend people go to? Which is sort of like your favorite that you would recommend people to?
well, I'd say uh, Sons of the he Sons of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe.
Mm.
Those are two collections that have both been. I think Penguin Books has collected them together as one. Um, and there's a yeah, there are a ton of stories in both of those. They're really excellent stuff. I think a lot of people really consider that to be his best work, but he hasn't published um, a lot. He used to be more active earlier in his career.
Mm.
I think there's also Teatro Grotesco. I don't even remember how to spell that exactly. That is one of his later collections, and I've read some of that. It's also very good. So I don't know. I don't think you can really go wrong with anything that he's written.
Mm. Yeah, no, I will. I would definitely check him out first by reading The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, um, and then I'll go on and check some of his other stuff out. Because I didn't actually realize he was as acclaimed as he sounds. So that's quite interesting that he's got like wider. Because I just assumed, to be honest, that he was just like a very niche antinatalist writer. Um, but yeah, it's good that he's got like broader appeal to people who would not necessarily have come into contact with antinatalism before. Um, so going back to Vile Visions, so what I guess it's kind of an odd one, right? Because you were saying there's a couple of the stories in the, I guess you'd refer to it as a collection, right? In this collection of short stories that have antinatalist undertones. So it doesn't necessarily define the book. Um, because I was going to ask what's it like getting a book that has antinatalist themes published. Um, but they're kind of encased within a wider collection, right? So those themes are buffered by all of the other themes in in the collection. But also, if you're publishing it in the category of horror fiction, then it's kind of like people like those sort of themes, right? That's kind of what they're there for. They want themes that are kind of dark and depressing, however you want to put it, pessimistic. Um, but yeah, I guess at least I can ask what the process of getting published was like and why you chose the publisher that you did. Or maybe I'm being ignorant about the publishing process. Maybe you don't choose them. Maybe it's just a matter of sending it out and one of them accepts it. How does that process work?
Well, so Vile Visions, which is my first collection that I published, that one I self-published.
Mm,
Um, so there's not really any obstacle to doing that. I just I got the cover art and I did the formatting and everything that's related to putting a book together, and then I went on Amazon and I just put it up, and
mm,
um, people who have read it have uh, enjoyed it. It's it's not um, selling tons of copies, but that's kind of just being a new writer.
mm,
In general, it's almost impossible to sell anything. So I think it's been doing pretty well for what it is.
mm,
And then I also self-published my second collection, Odd Ordeals, which is also horror. Not all of it's horror. It's dark comedy,
mm,
essentially. So those are more humorous. They're also a lot of them very dark. Um, but um, yeah, that's that one. And then the one that I've gotten that I did get published by a publisher was my most recent novella, My Weird Nightmare Baby, which is it's a horror comedy,
mm,
um, basically. And I sent that to a few different publishers that are all looking for the genre is called Bizarro. It's kind of Bizarro is kind of about writing the weirdest, craziest things you can possibly think of.
mm,
Um, and this book is definitely that. It's really uh, kind of off the wall in its subject matter, but I got it rejected 3 times, I think. And then Planet Bizarro Press, um, which is kind of a newer Bizarro publisher. Matt Clark, who runs that press, had previously accepted a shorter story of mine for an anthology that he put together, and
mm,
so I thought that I thought he might be into it, and so I sent it to him, and yeah, he got back to me really quite quickly, saying that he loved it and that he wanted to publish it. So um, that's pretty much how that happened.
mm. And this the publisher Planet Bizarro, right?
That's right.
We spoke before about there's another author that was published with that publisher, and they wrote a story that has antinatalist themes in it. So this publisher, they obviously seem um, quite open to this sort of subject matter, which um, I don't know. Like, is there any significance like surrounding that, do you think, or is it just, Planet Bizarro, they're looking for bizarre kind of themes, antinatalism is fringe, seems bizarre to many people? Do you think it's that simple, or there are some there are some publishers that sort of go out of their way to publish things that otherwise wouldn't be published? um do you think there's an element of that, or is it just, it fits the bill, and so they agree to publish some of these sort of things?
Well, Bizarro is definitely, uh, sort of very niche. That there are very few publishers that are looking for stuff like that, and so I would say it's probably a coincidence that both I and this other writer wrote books with antinatalist themes in particular that were
Mm,
essentially published back to back by this um, publisher. But it is kind of like they're looking for the kind of stuff that these bizarro publishers, they're looking for the kind of stuff that can't be published anywhere else. No other publisher on the
mm,
planet would want something this weird, this
mm,
utterly deranged as the kind of fiction that gets published in these places. Um, and so, yeah, maybe uh, I guess Bizarro certainly could be attractive to people with more fringe ideas like antinatalism.
mm.
It's not something that I've seen in a lot of Bizarro, but I've seen. I've seen all kinds of really strange ideas being explored. So, um, I mean, I yeah, I think there's something to that. Um,
Mm. Yeah, because I know there's another publisher. The exact name is escaping me. It's something like Nine Band Books or something. Maybe you know it. That it's the publisher that published Every Cradle Is a Grave by Sarah Perry. I don't know if you know that book.
oh, I do know that, and I
I
wasn't
think
familiar with who the publisher was.
Yeah, I think it's called Nine Band Books. Let me look it up. Um, because I remember when I read Sarah Perry's book and I looked into um, the publisher. I Yeah, nine banded books. I remember getting the impression that um, as a publishing brand, or I don't know how you refer to them, um, but they came across as the sort of publisher that takes on books that otherwise wouldn't be published elsewhere. Because obviously, Sarah Perry's Every Cradle Is a Grave talks about antinatalism, talks about suicide, etc., etc. So these are topics that a lot of publishers would avoid. Um, so it was interesting to see that form of publisher. So I wondered whether Planet Bizarro, there was something sort of similar going on there, but obviously, with Every Cradle Is a Grave, that's non-fiction. So I was wondering if Planet Bizarro was sort of like the same flavor but with fiction. And like you were saying, it's maybe that's not the whole picture, but maybe there's sort of like an element of that or whatever. Um,
Mm.
have you So you were saying, obviously, in this collection, there are, you know, a few of the stories that have antinatalist themes. What's the extent of the rest of your writing that has antinatalist themes in it, or is it something that actually you haven't explored that much in the context of your whole sort of body of work?
Well, um, so Vile Visions has some of that, yeah, and then my second collection, Odd Ordeals, has a few stories that I would say are very antinatalist. And then My Weird Nightmare Baby is probably the the most blatantly antinatalist thing that
Mm,
I've written. When when I first got when I first discovered Bizarro as a genre and was thinking of um, what I mean, I'd always kind of been um, writing Bizarro my whole life and didn't even realize it until didn't realize that there was a genre for that until a few years ago. And when I did, I decided I wanted to write something that was um, very much in sort of in line with what other people were writing in that genre and try to get it published by a Bizarro publisher. And when
mm,
I was coming up with ideas, I guess it came to me almost right away that I wanted to do something that was kind of antinatalist. Um, but um, I really also just set out to write um, the craziest, most entertaining book that I possibly could. Um, and I think I succeeded in that as well. I think that's why I think most people who read it, if they like it, they're probably going to like it just because it's um, it's an entertaining book, and um, if the antinatalist themes resonate with them, that's great.
mm,
If they don't, that's fine too. I did have, I think I had one review at least that described the book as thought provoking,
mm,
which, yeah, I mean, I want it to be. So
mm.
that was good to see someone say that in their review. Um,
Yeah. Have you since I'm assuming, you know, just being in so that I you know found out about you through one of the Facebook groups on antinatalist Facebook groups. So I'm assuming you're somewhat plugged into sort of the online community that way, but have you and we've already, you know, referred to one other author, but have you is there any sort of community at all, any sort of coherent community based around antinatalist fiction writing, or specifically horror fiction, or is it just sort of like you're just individual members within the wider antinatalist community, but you don't really have like a smaller subset of the community?
yeah, there's not really any particular community that I know of
Mm.
for that.
How many other authors are you aware of, like large or small?
Well, I mean, we mentioned Thomas Ligotti, of course,
Mm.
and then this other author who was published in uh, by Planet Bizarro
Yeah.
Press after me. That's kind of it, really. I mean,
Mm.
um, I haven't gone out uh, necessarily looking for anybody else who has the same kind of views. I feel like in horror fiction, it's at least more likely to attract antinatalist writers than
Yeah.
other genres. And I've read horror that it's like, well, this could be um, an antinatalist writer writing this, but you know, as we said before, sometimes themes can be construed as antinatalist even if they're not intended to be. So it's always
Yeah.
kind of hard to tell if the writer's not um, come out in public and said that about themselves. Then I can only ever speculate.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we were saying about Frankenstein that if someone had no knowledge at all of the author and they were antinatalist and they read Frankenstein, they would they could be forgiven for thinking that it was written with an antinatalist message, but the chances are it's not. Um, Another example is a poet I came across recently. So that I am super ignorant on poetry, never been into poetry, but I came across a poet recently called W.H. Auden, who apparently I've learned since is actually quite famous. Um, but he's well no longer around, but was a British poet, and he wrote a poem called "Death's Echo," I think, and the poem itself it comes across with what seems like a pretty strong antinatalist message. And I did look into the guy a bit, and he I can't. I'm pretty sure he didn't have kids. It doesn't say anywhere that he did, um, but it's something that I want to look into a bit more because I was maybe going to do like a video on it to raise a bit more awareness about the poem, but I was also speaking to a friend, and we were talking about how you need to be wary about, because if you're antinatalist, you're part of a small community. It's usually something that you're passionate about, and so we're more inclined to come across something that is suggestive of antinatalism, and because we want the author to be like, oh yeah, he's one of us, or she's one of us. We sort of there's a bit of motivated reasoning there because we kind of want it to be, actually antinatalist. Um, so yeah, I get what you mean because I've had a similar thing with this poem recently, which I need to do a bit more looking into. Um, but yeah, so what well, obviously you don't have to share anything, but are you working on anything for the future? Is there anything you can sort of let us know about to expect in however long at some point in the future? Are you working on anything in general or anything that has antinatalist themes again or anything like that?
Well, I'm always working on. I tend to have a few projects um, going at any given time,
Mm,
and the next thing likely the thing I'm most likely to publish next is going to be kind of a follow up to Vile Visions. I'll probably call it like Vile Visions Volume 2.
mm,
Um, and that's just more horror stories
mm,
that I think early next year, I'll be
yeah.
publishing that. Um, there will be, I suppose there are antinatalist themes explored in there. Um,
Mm,
but um, other than that, I mean, uh, I really kind of write a variety of stuff. One thing that I'm close to finishing a draft on is like kind of a vulgar Christmas comedy
oh, nice.
called "How Pilsner Dickens Saved Christmas," and I
Yeah.
don't know when I'm going to be publishing that one, but
Mm,
that one's just kind of um, wasn't really going for any deep message in there. It's
mm,
um, just just going for being funny with that one. And
mm,
then I also I write autism fiction
Mm,
because I'm autistic, and so um, I haven't really published anything like that yet, but there's, for instance, there's a novel that I'm working on that's kind of um, young adult novel about
mm,
um, I guess it's like about this autistic girl navigating the difficulties of middle school, and there are some elements of fantasy included.
mm,
Um, and that's about as far from Vile Visions or My Weird Nightmare Baby as you can possibly get. But
mm,
I just like writing um, anything that, um, anytime an idea speaks to me, then that's it's likely to turn into a story.
mm. And
So.
I can't remember exactly what you called it, autism fiction or autistic fiction. Um,
Um, yeah, just fiction with autistic characters, basically.
right. Okay. So it's not because I found that interesting. I didn't know, yeah, if that was fiction that was based around an autistic protagonist or other characters, or if it was fiction that could be on any subject, but it was written in a way that somehow is more palatable to people with certain types of autism. I'd never heard of the term before, but that's interesting. Do you know, is that sort of like a is that like a wide genre, or is that also quite niche?
Um, yeah, it's. I feel like there's more and more of it nowadays.
Mm,
Um, uh, a number of autistic writers are out there writing stories of all kinds
mm,
about autistic characters, and some non-autistic writers writing some of those types of stories as well. It's not it's not necessarily super mainstream, but some of those authors are um, have garnered a fair amount of attention with
mm,
their work.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd never come across that genre before. But yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to cover with respect to Vile Visions, or just antinatalism and horror in general?
Um, Let me think. No, I don't think I can think of anything at the moment.
Mm. Well, it's been interesting talking to you. Like I said at the start, I've not spoken to anyone before who has written an antinatalist fiction, or especially like a specifically horror fiction. So when I came across you online, I thought it would be interesting to talk to you and just explore that, because like a lot of the stuff you see online with antinatalism, or even when you meet other antinatalists in person, it's really people discussing the philosophy and stuff, which is entertaining. Like, I do that a lot, and it's all cool. But it's nice once in a while to put a limelight on the more creative aspect, um, or maybe not the creative aspect of antinatalism, but the creativity that can come out of the idea, or be centered around the idea. We've mentioned a couple of authors today. There's also different artists as well who do artwork. Um, so yeah, I was looking forward to this one, and I've enjoyed it. So thanks so much for coming on, Riley.
Oh,
Where
sure.
where I don't know how sort of online you are, but is there anywhere if people want to stay up to date with you, when you make future publications or just anything you're sharing around, is there anywhere that people can sort of follow you, or would you prefer not to give any details for people to find you?
Um, well, I have a website,
Mm,
RileyOdellWriter.com. Um, that's RileyOdellWriter.com.
mm,
And so, any viewers who are interested in um, checking out my work, I'd say that's where they should go.
mm,
There are links to uh, my to various things there, and my Amazon author page, which has all my books on it that are
mm.
currently available. Um,
Yeah, well, I'll put all those links in the description so people just have them right there and they can find it and go to the website and the Amazon page and stuff. But yeah, like I said before, it's been a pleasure and thank you for coming on.
yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me.